Okay, hello. We're back. We're on live again. So once again, we're doing the same thing we did earlier this morning, and I've got a couple of bloggers here. And once again, we continue our tradition of only inviting white men to speak for the Social Justice Network. So we got Marcus Random and William Brinkman. Once again, William has fixed his audio problems. So he's going to tell us about his blog now, legibly, intelligibly, and audibly, without that weird crackly noise. So take it away, William.
Okay. I write for the Bolingbrook Babbler, which joined Free Thought Blogs in January, and it's been really exciting. I've been a fan of Free Thought Blogs for years, probably since its starting. So the history of the Babbler, I did the first post in 1998. I hand-coded it for my webpage, and then I did monthly updates until 2001. And basically, the idea was I lived in Bolingbrook, Illinois at the time, which is a southwest suburb of the Chicago area. And I just wondered what it would be like if it had a weekly world news style tabloid. And so over the years, it's evolved into kind of a cross between the Onion and the Weekly World News, with the UFO bases, creatures, and let's see. And I ran it from the first incarnation was from 1998 to 2001. And then I took a break and restarted in 2007, and it's been going ever since. Pretty much it's been a mix of factual news and kind of old school tabloid fiction mixed in. I've actually heard from some local leaders of Bolingbrook, including the mayor. And at first he tried to be friendly, but then I received a few midnight emails from him, and I figured just best to stay away from him. And let's see. So the stories I've been proud of that have been featured on Free Thought Blogs are Bolingbrook trustees desperately avoiding each other to avoid inaugurating a newly elected trustee, because for decades, Bolingbrook's only been run by one political party. And last April, a new political party managed to get a seat, Bolingbrook United. And the other story I'm really proud of, which I did some research on, was the Flat Earth Charter School. And I just didn't realize there were so many variations on flat Earth theory. And pretty much I'll conclude by saying I feel like since I moved to Free Thought Blogs, it's been a renaissance, and it's undergone many incarnations over the years. I changed my mind. I started out as more of the skeptic in the Jeff Wag mode, and now I'm closer to PZ Myers. And it's been exciting, and
Entropy.
the future looks bright. Yeah. Yeah, and hopefully later this year or early next year, I'll be releasing a novella based, which is kind of a variant of the setting of the Bolingbrook Babbler.
Very good. One thing I will comment on that I greatly appreciate is that when you write fiction, you clearly label it as fiction.
Exactly.
We are not pushing fake news.
No.
Yes, and it's good to see, because I have no problem with satire or humor as long as it's hysterical and humorous.
Right.
I just can't stand those sites that sort of blur the line and pretend that their fake story is something real.
Yeah. I can tell you a little bit about the evolution. When I started in the late 90s, I thought it's so obvious it's humor, I don't need to label it. And then when I started up again in 2007, I saw how the internet was and realized I better label this. And then and now it's gotten progressively worse. I mean, now we're in the era of fake news, and it's my determination not to be a part of fake news.
Yep. Yeah, I still occasionally see on Facebook and things like that people citing news slow, for instance, which is one of the worst of the worst. And I berate them and tell them, no, I'm not following this link, and you're bad for posting it.
Exactly.
Okay, we heard you this time. That's good.
Yes.
Marcus, what have you been doing?
Okay, yeah, so I'm Marcus Random. I've been doing computer security stuff for about just under 30 years now, and most of my past blogging and writing has been complaining about various aspects of computer security that are inaccurate. For example, cyber war, and then writing about bits of the surveillance state and specific targeted security technologies. So, you know, I grew up with a couple of parents who were historians, and they loved medieval art, which meant religious art. So I kind of grew up a-religious, because it's very, first off, if you hate the art and you look at all this stuff, you just go, what the hell's wrong with these people? And in my 20s, I started cross-applying the skepticism I had applied to religion to politics and nationalism. And I really, a bunch of years ago, I kind of came to the conclusion that the same engine that drives religion and nationalism is authoritarianism and exceptionalism. So if you think you're special or you're powerful and you want to push people around, which are the two fundamental things behind nationalism and religion, I see a connection there. And I try not to, beat on religion very much, but because it's just such a big target. We've got, exceptional authoritarians like Sam Harris and Christopher Hitchens and people like that who beat that dead horse pretty well. I was on science blogs back in 2007. I dropped in for an afternoon because I was bored, and I got used as a chew toy by a bunch of the regulars, which was really exciting and interesting. And I found, it's great that there's places on the internet where you can hang out and have a serious discussion, even if it's painful. So the blog that I'm doing, I call it Standard Error, which is an old C programmer term, and it's not really oriented towards anything in specific. It's kind of, I suppose you could say, anti-authoritarian, probably anti-government. I certainly make a lot of critiques of the government's computer security practices, because that's really where I live and breathe. But I'm generally unfond of a lot of the authoritarian crap that's being rained down on us all the time. I'm occasionally doing book reviews of books that I think are interesting or delightful. Editorial opinion pieces. It's nice to be able to write about something other than computer security, but doing all the research and stuff has taken a lot more time than I expected. I'm also doing a series I call Argument Clinic, where I try to dissect standard methods and tropes for arguing on the internet in a slightly sarcastic way. But really, I'm for my own sake, I'm trying to understand, how do you argue with people on the internet, not necessarily as a blood sport, but simply because when somebody pulls some of these particular maneuvers, they have some kind of a broader purpose in mind. They're trying to do something. And if I can try to understand that and how to, lance those boils, that's particularly useful. And then I also occasionally drop pieces of probably badly translated writings from Voltaire, and I've also been quoting big chunks of Abbé Meslier's Testament, which is, as far as I'm concerned, it's the ultimate takedown of religion. It was something he published posthumously after they couldn't burn him at the stake in 1767, I think it was. And it's this gigantic gobstopper of arguments that you'll see appearing over and over and over again in the writings of people like Christopher Hitchens and Sam Harris, whether they lifted it from there or not. That's where that comes from. So that's what I'm doing. Okay.
So, like the old French guy, these arguments never will win for us. That's kind of how I feel about it. And often when I get into these arguments, it's not because I'm out to defeat somebody, because I don't think you can. But what's really useful about it is if you make the arguments yourself, you're exercising your brain and you're clarifying things in your own head. And I've always found that helpful.
I've also adopted a technique I learned from a guy back in the late 90s, where you realize that you're not really trying to convince the person you're arguing with. You're trying to convince the people who are listening silently. And so
exactly.
Yeah, so you use that person as a foil to, kind of just, elucidate why you think this particular thing is okay. And you don't really, sometimes you don't have to argue against them at all. You can just let them sound like they're wrong.
Yeah.
Given the president, maybe I can't say that's working so well.
Oh, when you let them come to power, yeah, then it's not working anymore. Yeah, one other approach I've seen is, has anybody read about Boghossian's street epistemology? Oh,
Maybe a long
yeah.
time ago.
I hate that stuff. I really do.
It hurts.
Yeah, it's where you've got a set of arguments, and what you try to do is trap the person in some kind of inconsistency. And the idea is that you'll make them feel bad about making this argument, but they don't really.
No.
I listen to these. The YouTube is full of these street epistemology exercises, and I listen to them, and there's one thing they always remind me of, and it's Ray Comfort.
Well, I consider that method of argumentation to be fundamentally dishonest, because if what you're doing is you're arguing, it should be a creative process. It should be that you're really engaged with the other person's words. You're trying to understand where they're coming from, and you're putting together arguments that are designed to respond to them, which is, again, why I have, no respect for people like William Lane Craig, who keep trotting out these horrible old chestnuts that have been destroyed thousands of years ago in some cases. And, Boghossian is basically doing that.
Yeah. A good argument is a creative thing. It's not trying to trick the other person into feeling awkward or uncomfortable about what they're saying. It's about getting a good dialogue going and getting ideas exchanged back and forth. And
Exactly.
And it seems like a lot of people are thinking instead, the argument is to crush your enemies and make them cry, and it just doesn't do it.
Or at least, berate them into silence.
I would say the ultimate goal is to educate them, and and frequently, if we acknowledge going into it that the person that we're talking to maybe just doesn't understand things the same way we do, and then you give them all this stuff here, you can understand it. Hopefully, they're going to do the same analysis and come around to you. Of course, my hero is Voltaire. I wish I could argue like he did, but he was the world's greatest at finding exactly the right place to put exactly the correct pin in to make a balloon pop.
Right. Yeah, and you learn something when you read his work. That's what matters. And that's the case with a lot of these arguments, that victory doesn't come in a moment of triumph in an argument. It comes from getting the other person to start thinking, and they go off and they think.
And if we can talk about things we hate, one of the things I really despise is when you look on YouTube and you see all those, so-and-so destroys so-and-so.
Oh,
exactly.
That never works.
No.
And they're never destroyed. You come back later to, maybe if I check back in a half hour, they'll have photos of the fragments. But no, the guy is doing the same thing all over again somewhere else. It's just...
So one of the opening moves. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, just like a display of YouTube machoism. I've destroyed your argument. I'm awesome.
Yeah.
So one of the things I like to use sometimes as a genuinely interested opening move is, are you open to being convinced otherwise? And then the other question I love, which is it's a curious thing, is where did you get your opinion from anyway? How did you form your belief system? Because that encourages the other person to plant their stake in the ground and explain how they achieved their beliefs, and then sometimes you can go, well, did you think about this? Did you think about that? This Socrates did all that stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
I thought that was probably the most effective part of Bill Nye's debate with Ken Ham, is when he pinned him down and said, okay, what would convince you to change your mind on this? And Ham was just obstinate that there was nothing that could ever convince him that he was wrong. And that's the point where I kind of felt like, this debate could have been a lot shorter if Bill Nye just said, okay, then we're done. Sorry, bye. Right at that moment.
Yeah.
But of course, they talked on for another, 2 hours? Oh, well.
Well, this is a problem in the post-truth world. People will simply assert things and then just keep holding on to it like a limpet, and they'll never move from their position. It's very sad.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, another big problem is when they hold to this position and then they make this bogus argument, well, my position is not ideological and yours is.
Yes.
Yeah.
We're seeing a lot of that in the skeptical community and the rationalist community.
I think the way to respond to that, because actually someone just called me an ideologue over on Standard Error a couple days ago. I think the way to respond to that is say, well, actually, I think I'm making reasoned arguments. I'm saying things that build on each other, that are tied to facts. And somebody who is being ideological would simply assert something and then work backwards from there. So could you tell me what I'm being ideological about, or so we can divide the landscape into the things that I'm bloviating about and the things that I'm actually supporting with fact, and then you can argue with my facts or not.
Yep.
I don't know if it'll work or not.
Oh, nothing will work against people like that. But
yeah.
But again, it's a mental exercise. It sharpens your brain. And
but so why do you bother? Why do you bother? I mean,
why do I bother? Because
yeah,
I like to think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's helping exercise my mind as well. I mean, I had a troll last month who really pushed me, and like PZ said, it stretches your mind. I realized I didn't really fully argue why you should support the other candidate. And next election, depending on how things go, I'll have to do that. I'll have to keep that in mind.
Yeah, it's also of concern because like right now we've got Nazis in America.
Yes.
How did we get to that point? It's because we treated things as a game, because we accepted that, they're just joking excuse, and
right.
We allowed a whole group of people to sort of drift away from reality for the last decade or two or three or four.
Yeah, and I would say we allowed criticism of feminism and straw feminism to grow, and then we created a room for Nazis to move in. And I won't call them alt-right; they're Nazis.
Yep. Okay, well, this is turning into a depressing discussion. Say something cheerful, Marcus.
I don't see a tremendous amount of hope unless we can actually start teaching fundamental reasoning in school again. I mean, I don't know what they teach nowadays, but we actually had to study Socratic argument and how to justify what you think. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, in my field, I don't have to worry too much about that, but I don't think the schools are doing a good job. When you've got students showing up who don't know basic math, there's a serious problem going on in our educational system.
The part that gets me the worst and that I do not understand. So I live up in rural Pennsylvania, out in flyover country or whatever. It's all Trump country out here, and I will hear people talking out loud in line at the post office. They'll talk about welfare mammies, or they'll talk about people who own Benzes but collect food stamps. And occasionally I will challenge these people. It doesn't mean you're particularly popular in my neighborhood, but I think a big piece of how we got here is that this kind of crap is allowed to just get out there without somebody calling it the lies that it is. And I think the media has caught on to the strategy of pointing out lies for what they are, but they've done it about 10 years too late. Because they used to put up with lies when it was their guy in the office, and now they're not putting up with lies when it's not their guy. And that's transparently obvious to everybody. If I talk to people in my neighborhood, which I do occasionally, and they basically say it's the liberal media is going after the president and it's all lies. They believe it.
Yeah, I have never seen the liberal media in action, however. I've seen an awful lot of the conservative media, but
yeah.
Well, so I had a couple of guys in line in front of me in the post office once, and it was the guys who were talking about welfare mammies, and I finally just said, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I couldn't help but overhearing because I was standing right behind you. You're talking kind of loudly, but most of the people in Clearfield County who are on welfare are white. I think about 97% of them.
Right.
So that so you're making fun of your friends and your neighbors, man. And the other thing is, I know people who've fallen off the power curve, and living on food stamps is no damn fun. What's fun is being a congressman or an investment banker or somebody like that. And what they've done is they've set the poor against each other in order to continue to run away with this massive slice of the pie. And they all kind of backed away from me there because I think they realized I'm at least a socialist or maybe worse.
Yeah. No, I don't get those fun experiences because I'm in a very small town, and everybody knows me, and they all know the pinko liberal communist atheist. And so if I'm around, all of a sudden the conversation starts to die off. Unless, of course, it's with my fellow communist pinko atheists at the university.
Well, I think the left is making. I don't really like the left-right divide as an organizing principle, but I'll just use that for term. But I think that the social equality crew have made a terrible mistake by favoring just picking on the edges of Trump's stupidity rather than just going straight for the throat and saying, why is it that these people are serving the interests of wealth and power? How did they get fooled into doing that? Why is it that Northrop Grumman gets, a significant percentage of the economy and we can't have good Medicare? Why are these things happening? How did this, culture war happen? Those are the questions we're not asking. Instead, we're asking about, Trump's Russia relationships, and that's just, land war in Asia.
Yeah. No, I've seen people who do go right to the heart of it. But they're overwhelmed by all the so-called liberal pundits who would rather talk about Russia and talk about these fringe issues because ultimately they're not really interested in deep structural changes to society. And that's kind of what we need, is a radical renovation of how we work.
I would argue that Russia is kind of important because it's basically a foreign government interfering with our elections, and we shouldn't have done that with other countries, and now we're getting it back to us. But the fundamental, the structural issues are important as well.
Right. Go ahead.
Sure.
I was going to say, there's an inherently nationalistic thread just in your comment, which I would reject. I would say that we've got humans who are manipulating other humans in order to allow different groups of humans to remain in power over them inappropriately. I don't care whether it's American humans or Russian humans. Everyone is being manipulated. Putin's servants are victims, and so are the Americans who've been victimized.
Yeah. The other side of it, though, is that I have a cynical view of it, that what it really is people say, oh, here's one handle we can use to get this guy out of power. And it's purely a pragmatic decision. Whereas if we do as Marcus does and go right for the heart of healthcare or whatever, we won't be able to pry him out as quickly.
No.
Although if we did succeed in getting him out on those grounds, we would have a better society as a consequence.
Yeah.
We would have to have a revolution first, and revolutions always turn into something worse than what they replace.
Yeah.
Yes, total chaos is an opportunity for somebody else to step in and take the high seat, and that's.
I would argue that is what has happened with Trump. I mean, yeah, American racism and white stupidity is a huge part of that whole thing. But another piece of it is people are sick of politics as usual, and so they justified their racism and ignorance by saying, well, let's just vote for someone who's going to burn it all to the ground. That's how the Russians wound up with Stalin for a while.
Yeah.
It's how Bernie is succeeding.
Yes. Or, as I was going to say, an example in Bolingbrook. I mean, the mayor was, for many decades, had a tradition of being a moderate Republican. Then all of a sudden he jumped onto the Trump bandwagon and became a delegate and said we have to shake things up. And it's like I felt like, if you shake things up, sometimes you break things. Things are breaking right now.
Well, there are things that should be broken, and and that's the thing. We need to be pointing at those. Like, I'm fascinated by the defense procurement system and the defense budget, not because I have any stake in it. It's just absurd that we spend more money than the rest of the world combined on defense, and yet we have an army that basically sucks, but they've got really cool high-tech toys that also kind of basically suck. But it's the old joke about how does the Department of Defense cross a moat to a castle? They throw money in it and then they walk across. Those are the kinds of questions that I think we should be answering, and we should be able to ask those questions practically. Like, would you rather have a wall around Mexico, or an F-35, or Canada-style medical care with caps on what people?
C. I say C. I want C.
Yeah.
And the other point I like to make on that is, if you ask, according to Pew polls, I don't know whether they're good or not, but according to Pew polls, 80% of Americans favor some reduction in defense spending. So how is it that reducing defense spending is something that never shows up on any party plank anywhere? Well, what we really should be talking about is, why can't we have government subsidized health insurance? And usually somebody goes, oh, well, see, then you'd have to put cost pricing caps on medical procedures. And I go, that sounds like a good idea too. And then they start, saying socialist. It's just a label. It doesn't mean anything to me. Sorry, I'm ranting.
Okay.
But I think you're ranting to a sympathetic audience, so it's okay.
Yes.
We're agreeing with you. Okay, well, we've had a good discussion. I do want to keep it short, though, so I suggest we call a halt for the night, and I'm going to try and do this again next weekend, so we'll see if we can get some more people there and just get a regular conversation going.
Sounds great.
Okay.
Thanks for your time.
Oh, thank you.
And thank you for the opportunity.
Good night, everyone.